Hello and welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your weekly dose of the top pro-life news and issues, all from a Catholic perspective. I'm your host, Catherine Hadro, in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thank you for joining us. In this week's show, a Catholic expert explains how church teachings can heal the wounds created by the sexual revolution. Abortion advocates defend late-term abortion. We speak out. And this.
The Lord called us to do this. It's not something that we basically said, hey, let's go make an abortion movie tomorrow.
I sit down with the two Catholic directors behind the upcoming movie Unplanned. Hear how their faith played a role. But first, our top story, the Supreme Court recently issued a stay on a pro-life Louisiana law. The High Court earlier this month issued a stay on enforcement of a Louisiana law requiring abortionists have admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of the abortion facility. The Supreme Court order comes after the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in favor of the law. The law was introduced in 2014 by Democratic State Representative Katrina Jackson. It passed with overwhelming bipartisan support in both the state's House and Senate. Joining us now is the pro-life Democrat behind this law. Louisiana State Representative Katrina Jackson joins us via Skype from Monroe, Louisiana. Representative, thanks for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Representative Jackson, you introduced this bill, which passed, as I mentioned, with overwhelming support in both your state's House and Senate. What did you set out to accomplish with this piece of legislation?
This was a women's health piece of legislation. We try to always legislate constitutionally here. Being a practicing attorney, that's very important. But also, we want to pass bills that actually help the constituency while, of course, clearing hurdles in court, because we know that a lot of our laws are challenged in the area of abortion. Louisiana already has in place here the ambulatory surgical center law. That means that every surgical center in the state of Louisiana must have a physician within 30, which has admitting privileges to hospitals within the 30-mile radius of their facility. So that was really important because Dorinda Borley with the Bioethics Defense Fund contacted me and she said, listen, I don't know if you guys realize this, but the law that was passed years ago to protect women's health and doesn't apply to abortion facilities. It was inadvertently left out because abortion facilities were in another portion of the statute. And so really what I sought out to do here is to make sure that we didn't make an exception for women's health when it came to abortion. And that's really what this law is. It's quite different from some other laws you've seen because our state actually has an interest in what happens here in the state of Louisiana regarding women's health with physicians having a 30-mile radius admitting privileges to a hospital.
Why then, Katrina, is a law like this getting any pushback at all, in your opinion?
I'm not sure. I think that, of course, those who are pro-choice don't want any regulations. And there's not any area of healthcare, and I don't consider abortion healthcare, to be honest with you, but any area where physicians are practicing what they do believe it to be healthcare that doesn't have some type of regulations. And so those who are pro-choice don't want any regulations on abortions. We face that so many times in so many battles across this state and across the nation. And that's the only reason why there'd be pushback, because this is a common sense law. Louisiana requires that if you have a mole removed in a surgical center, that physician has admitting privileges within a 30-mile radius.
What then is your reaction to the Supreme Court stay on this law?
Well, I know that Justice Roberts and others on the Supreme Court will issue stays usually on the status quo of law until such time as they can hear the actual case. And so we're anticipating that the abortion doctors will file for writ to the Supreme Court. That's the real decision for us. Whether or not justices issue a stay just to keep the status quo in place until they can actually review a law is something that you see traditionally, regardless of where you legislate or what area of the law you legislate in. And so my reaction was, of course, I'd hope that they wouldn't issue the stay and our law could go into place. We've been at this, 4.5 years now. It passed in 2014, so 4.5, 5 years now. But I understand, being a practicing attorney, that courts usually will stay with the status quo until such time as they've had an opportunity to actually review the law.
In the meantime, what steps do you and the state of Louisiana plan to take in order to defend this law?
Well, our Attorney General, Jeff Landry, is defending the law, and he is very aggressively defending this law. We believe it's a common sense law. Our governor, who was actually in the state legislature at the time and voted for this law, is a Democratic governor who's for life at every stage of life, and he is supportive of it. And I'm sure his staff will probably submit a amicus curiae brief if the Supreme Court takes this issue up. They still have to decide whether they take it up or not. And of course, for the first time I'm being admitted into the Supreme Court, I've just filled out all my paperwork to be admitted to the United States Supreme Court because I want to be there if it's heard, if the Supreme Court decides to take it up. I've talked to the Attorney General's office and say, look, this is a law I believe in. And so I want to be there at the table arguing aggressively for this law. And so we're all working collectively to make sure that we're fighting aggressively for it.
Absolutely. Katrina, I think some of our viewers may be surprised to hear you are a pro-life Democrat because there are fewer and fewer pro-life Democrats serving in office. Can you share with our audience, why are you pro-life?
It's what I said at the March of Washington, the March for Life in Washington. Before I'm black or white, before I'm male or female, before I'm Democrat or Republican, I'm a Christian. And I didn't get into politics to put my Christian values behind me. I got into politics to advocate for Christian values, to take care of people, to pass common sense legislation that made sense, but also followed the will of God. My district elected me overwhelmingly. When I first ran, it was 4 of us in a race. And I was elected with 50-some% of the vote with 3 other candidates in the race. And everyone said, you're going to a runoff. But I believe it's because I told them, I said, listen, I'm going to pray every day. I'm going to ask God to lead me. And when I go into the legislature, I'm not going to abandon God's principles. And so it was very important for me not to. And so this is what I told actually my party in Louisiana. I made it real clear. I never hid from it. I never ran from it. I said, look, Proverbs says that God hates the shedding of innocent blood. That's one of the 6 things that he hates. And I'm going to be on the side of God. I'm going to hate what he hates. I'm going to advocate for the things that he told me to advocate for.
What has been your experience as a pro-life Democratic legislator?
It's varied. I have not had a lot of opposition in my district, but it's been highs and lows in the sense of when I go into certain parts of the state. I know in New Orleans I received death threats, and so for a couple of years when I would go into New Orleans, of course, to do pro-life speeches, I would be escorted in by the state police, and they were so wonderful. I was never scared because I said, you know what, God, I know you're going to protect me as we go in. And then I've had some highlight moments. The only bill that I've ever passed where 80 some out of 105 House members stood at the podium with me for final passage was this bill. It was both Democrat, Republicans, black and white, male and female. I mean, that is the most beautiful picture I have in the State House was the day we made final passage of this bill and 80 some other members came and stood around the podium with me. So I can say that overwhelmingly, even with the death threat or things that have happened, my experience as a pro-life Democrat has been heartwarming. I've seen people come together. This is one of the issues that I advocate for, where it doesn't matter who you are, what party you're a part of, what walk of life you come from, your social economic background. We're standing together, and so it's been great.
Finally, Katrina, you mentioned you spoke at this year's March for Life rally stage in Washington, D.C. Can you tell us, what was that like?
It was a surreal experience. I remember walking on stage and seeing everyone. I was like, okay, God, I've never been in front of this type of audience. You're going to have to really give me what to say and just lead me. And people don't know this, but I didn't even have a prepared speech. I went into Washington a couple of nights earlier, and I stayed up most of the night saying, what am I going to say, God? What do you want me to speak on? It wasn't until I actually came on stage that I knew what I was going to say. And so it was a surreal experience. I tell people all the time in my interviews, it was truly a move of the Holy Ghost. I tell people that all the time.
Louisiana State Representative Katrina Jackson, thank you for your pro-life work and thanks for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much.
We continue our pro-life conversation in our D.C. studio with Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List. Thanks for being here, Marjorie.
Hello, Catherine.
What is your reaction to the Supreme Court issuing this stay on this pro-life Louisiana law? What should our viewers make of this?
Well, don't grieve yet. It's actually just a temporary situation. There's a period of time where that stay will expire, and then after that it would just go into law. But what we're hoping in the meantime, though, is that the court does agree to take this up. The Supreme Court should look at this, and it should take a look at it versus the similar law in Texas and really overturn that Hellerstedt decision, which said that you can't do some really common sense stuff. And we really think, because Roberts agreed with us on the Hellerstedt decision, that it's possible that he'll agree with us on this. So there's a lot of hope, so keep watching.
What do you think, Marjorie, it reveals about abortion advocates, the fact that they're against this Louisiana law?
You know, it's something that pro-choice, pro-life, pro-abortion, anti-choice, whatever you call any of us,
right,
we ought to all be for taking care of women in cases of times of real disaster. All this does is require that abortionists have admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles in case disaster happens. So what this says to me is it really makes me remember, helps me remember the words of this state senator in Pennsylvania after the Gosnell horror. Her niece died in the Gosnell clinic. She was very pro-choice, but she said that is so clear to her now that the movement is so much more focused on the institution of abortion than the women that are having them. And that's exactly what this is.
Yeah. Can you speak to Katrina Jackson and her witness and her work as a pro-life Democrat?
She is beautiful, inside and out. She continually says, I'll never back away from this. It has nothing to do with the political party. This is just her being a Christian woman and being who she is. It's an extension of who she is. I think the Democratic Party ought to be following right behind her. She is a leader for the future for the Democratic Party, and we are so behind her, love her, and will do anything for her.
Wow, that's incredible. And this 2014 Louisiana law passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. Are there any opportunities for that kind of bipartisan support for pro-life laws in any other states?
Well, there are tons of consensus and overwhelming support for all sorts of pro-life laws. This, right after the Gosnell horror, kind of took off because they looked into these horrific situations in clinics and then started reading about all the stories. Laws started to pass, but then the Supreme Court overturned the Texas law, that Hellerstedt law, and therefore it just kind of put a chill on laws similar to this. But thank God for Representative Jackson, who said, no way, this is obviously wrong, we're going to continue to do this. And this law pretty directly challenges the Texas law. So we have an opportunity to overturn it, and then other similar laws would subsequently pass without question.
We'll keep our eye on this. It's an important one. Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Catherine.
By now, many of us have seen the video of Virginia Governor Ralph Northam making comments that sound like a defense of infanticide, explaining how babies born alive are left to die. It's a chilling reminder why abortion survivors are important witnesses in our world today. Their lives matter. And that's why it's especially shocking and extreme that Democrats in the House and Senate recently blocked the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, legislation that would protect newborns who survive abortions by requiring they get appropriate medical care. But good news, a roll call vote on this pro-life bill has been scheduled for Monday, February 25th. And that's why it's important you follow through with this week's call to action before then. Go to prolifeweekly.com. Again, that is prolifeweekly.com. At our website, you can directly tell your member of Congress to support the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act ahead of next week's vote. You will simply fill out basic information so we can craft the message to be for your specific U.S. representatives and senators, encouraging them to support the Born Alive bill. Again, congressional Democrats have blocked the Born Alive bill in both the House and Senate, but there is a new roll call vote on the pro-life bill scheduled for next week. We will have on record which lawmakers believe that babies who are born alive deserve necessary medical care. Tell your lawmakers to support the Born Alive bill because being against infanticide should not be a partisan issue. Again, send your message by going to prolifeweekly.com. Moving now to another segment, some experts cite the recent push for extreme abortion laws as a natural consequence of the sexual revolution's slippery slope. It's a topic we explore with our next guest. Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse is the founder and president of the Ruth Institute and the author of a new book, The Sexual State: How Elite Ideologies Are Destroying Lives and why the church was right all along. Dr. Morse, welcome onto the show.
I'm so glad to be here, Catherine.
It's great to have you here. Give us a glimpse into your new book. What do you mean by the sexual state?
What I mean is that what we call the sexual revolution was not a grassroots movement. It has never been a grassroots movement. It's something created by elites of society, generally rich and powerful people, who managed to capture the power of the state to enforce and inflict their ideologies on the rest of it. And you can particularly see that with the Supreme Court, but it's not only the Supreme Court, many aspects to the sexual state.
And in your book, you give scenarios of people who've been hurt by the sexual state. Can you speak to how abortion plays into that pain?
Well, abortion is kind of the backup plan for what I call the contraceptive ideology. Okay, so I have three ideologies that I talk about in the book, and one of them is the contraceptive ideology, which is the idea that a good society should do everything possible to separate sex and babies. And of course, the idea of separating sex and babies is that you can have sex as much as you want and never have any problems or consequences. So abortion is absolutely necessary as the backup plan in case your contraception fails, right? And so that's why it's so crucial. And in the book, I even cite people who say, you know, look, we're not going to go into this foreign country and start promoting contraception unless they've already legalized abortion, because they know that they need both of those things.
How then, Dr. Morse, can following the church's teachings on life and sexuality help begin to heal this pain?
Well, one of the most important things is that for people who have already in some way participated in the sexual revolution, you know, there are a lot of people, I like to say that there are people who are both victims and perpetrators. Like a lot of people have done things that they have learned to their sorrow that they shouldn't have done it. So one of the most important things is to go to confession, you know, and get that healing that you need from doing what you know to be wrong.
Can you speak to how building up the family is important for the pro-life movement?
Oh, Catherine, oh, I can't believe you even asked me that. That's so important. There are so many ways that the breakdown of the family and abortion feed into one another, you know, and people just need to see that. So the most obvious place is that probably 80% of abortions are done on unmarried women. Well, that means they're having sex to people they aren't married to, right? And so they're not prepared to form a family. And I say, within the Ruth Institute, that every child is entitled to a relationship with both of their parents, and that's what marriage is supposed to do. Most abortions are performed on unmarried women, and so that's the most obvious and biggest way, but there are many other ways that we could talk about and that I do talk about in the book.
Excellent. And finally, Dr. Morse, what advice might you have for people, especially our viewers, who are trying to live out the church's teachings on life and sexuality in a way that's so countercultural?
Well, it is countercultural, and I think that what we need to do is to take pride in the fact that we're being countercultural. Because, you know, I live in Louisiana, and one time I was giving a talk, and this poor little guy said to me, you know, I can't believe this crazy stuff you're telling us about, and they say we're backward. And I said, sir, you know, when the whole world's going off a cliff, being at the back of the line is okay. It's really okay, you know, and that's where things really are, you know, that a lot of people are sailing off the edge and not even knowing it. And I think history will show that it was the people of faith who had the good sense to see that this was a dead end and who had the courage to speak out about it.
Thank you for your research and for your insight on this topic. Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse, founder and president of the Ruth Institute and author of the new book, The Sexual State. Thank you. When we come back.
If you're a devout Catholic, it's through your very pores. I mean, everything, you know, you've got your...
Storytelling is all about conflict. Conflict at its root is always about sin. The issue is always sin in every story. It's just how it manifests itself.
I visited the Unplanned movie set and sat down with the two Catholic directors behind the film. Hear how their faith guided their work. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Hadro. A digital magazine designed for teenagers is highlighting and even defending late-term abortion. That's this week's Speak Out segment. Teen Vogue, which describes itself as the young person's guide to conquering and saving the world, is running a series of web articles defending late-term abortion procedures. In one of the articles, the author described what it was like for her to undergo an abortion at 28 weeks. She then praised New York and Virginia for, quote, their efforts to cut the medically unnecessary regulations on later abortion. In another article, the author argued that the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision did not go far enough. And in yet another article, a Teen Vogue writer rejected the phrase late-term abortion, claiming it's not a medical term. Instead, the writer referred to the procedures as a later abortion, which, it should be noted, is not medical terminology. These articles spill a lot of ink quibbling over abortion terminology and deploring regulations. But notice, these writers refuse to acknowledge what actually happens in a late-term abortion procedure. When a mother is in her third trimester, an induction abortion is usually committed. At this stage, the baby is almost fully developed and could survive outside of the womb. With the induction abortion procedure, the abortionist usually first kills the baby in utero by injecting a substance that causes a cardiac arrest and then induces the mother's labor, so she will deliver her baby stillborn. People who defend late-term abortion procedures won't tell you that information. And while we mourn any and every abortion, whether it's at week 1 or week 30 in a pregnancy, these latest efforts to specifically defend late-term abortions are particularly shocking and gruesome because these very lives could potentially survive outside of the womb. It should make the abortion issue black and white. Articles defending this type of barbaric procedure should not exist at all, let alone in outlets aimed for teenagers. Young women shouldn't be browsing for their next prom dress and then with one click be browsing different types of abortion procedures. Teen Vogue, no matter how hard you try, abortion will never be in style. Remember, there is something you can do to counter today's culture of death. Follow this week's call to action. Go to prolifeweekly.com and tell your member of Congress to support the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act ahead of next week's vote. We have a glimpse into the upcoming film portraying Abby Johnson's journey from Planned Parenthood director to pro-life leader, thanks to its recently released movie trailer.
Sorry to bother you, but they need an extra person in the back room. Are you free?
I saw it, and it was like it was twisting and fighting for its life.
Unplanned will be released in theaters everywhere on March 29th. It's based on Johnson's book of the same title about her powerful pro-life conversion. I had the chance to visit the movie set a few months back and sit down with some of the cast and crew, including the 2 Catholic directors behind the film. Here's our interview.
Carrie Solomon and Chuck Konzelman, thanks for speaking with me today. It's great to speak with you both.
Thanks for coming all the way here.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. So first questions first, how much is this film based on reality? Did you guys have to invent any storylines at all? How true to nature is it?
No, we interviewed Abby, read her book, got the rights for her book, and we wanted to do the truth. We believe that truth is powerful, and we didn't want to take sides. We just wanted to do the book and to obviously tell the truth. Now, the truth is painful sometimes to certain people, but we did do that. We didn't invent anything. The only thing we manipulated a little bit was time, because it happened over an 8-year period, so you have to speed it up to put it into 2 hours. Right. But so, you know, you jump here, you jump there, that kind of thing. But it's all true.
Now, this subject matter is a heavy one, and it's dark. So how do you take this heavy and dark subject matter of abortion? And it's more of an inspirational film, right? So how do you do that?
Well, first of all, we had the spirit. The Lord called us to do this. It's not something that we basically said, hey, let's go make an abortion movie tomorrow. Right. And so when you have the spirit pushing you, guiding you, showing you certain things, you know, some of our favorite scenes never made the movie. The Lord said drop them, and he gave us other scenes to put in their place.
And you both are devout Catholics.
We are devout Catholics.
How does that play into filmmaking?
You know, if you're a devout Catholic, it's through your very pores. I mean, everything, you know, you got your...
Storytelling is all about conflict. Conflict at its root is always about sin. The issue is always sin in every story. It's just how it manifests itself.
And you know, the Blessed Mother has said that she's going to end abortion. You know, we walk beneath her banner. We carry her banner into battle. So, you know, when the Lord called us to do this, he said, gird yourself, pick up your shield, pick up your sword.
As the filmmakers, what kind of pushback are you expecting from Planned Parenthood? And how are you preparing for that?
We'll be in court for the next 5 years.
Well, you know, look, the reality is you make decisions in your life, you know, the same way the apostles did, same way the disciples did, same way every true Christian has to make a decision. Sometimes those decisions have consequences, and sometimes those are not consequences you like.
Planned Parenthood on a 9-to-5 basis, Monday to Friday, in this country receives $250,000 per hour from the United States government. They're not going to willingly give up that cash stream. They're not going to not bring every legal resource they have to bear. That if they can swing it, they'd like to have us in jail. If not, they'd like to ruin us and the project financially. They will try to prevent distribution. They'll try everything that they can try.
But I will say this, though. We have prayed on this because in our fear, the Lord has spoken to us and he said, I need you to put on your helmet. I need you to pick up your shield and your sword. I need you to take the field of battle, but I will win the victory. And I prayed for my family and I prayed for us and I prayed for everything. And the Lord has said to us, do not be afraid. This is for my glory. Walk forward in faith. And so if you truly are a believer, if you're a devout believer, you know that when the Lord says that as bad as it's going to get, he's going to be there. Now, it's going to get bad. It's going to get crazy bad. But that's where he goes. That's when he does what he does.
There's going to be tremendous argument. The left is going to go crazy because this is their sacrament. Look, you know, inside every Planned Parenthood facility, at the deepest, darkest part, there's a place called the POC room. They call it products of conception, but the slang in-house in this facility is pieces of children. That's where the aborted remains, which have been ripped apart by suction abortions or friction abortions, are carefully washed and reassembled in Petri dishes so that they can make sure there's been nothing left inside the patient. And at the end of Saturday morning in Abby's facility, there'll be 40 Petri dishes with 40 forms to be filled out by the doctor, okay? And there'll be 40 aborted children there. That has to stop. It has to stop, and someone has to stop it. And a story is the most powerful way of doing that. We can't relate to anything unless it's in a story. That's why God told us a story and put it in a book. We can't relate to it otherwise. Stories have the power to move. And Abby's story in particular, because she was originally so strongly pro-choice, and then came to see the truth of what she was doing and is now so strongly pro-life, it's a journey the audience can go on with her and hopefully come to the same conclusion that she has.
For more information on Unplanned, go to unplannedfilm.com. That does it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Until next time, you can email me at prolifeweekly@ewtn.com or like my public page on Facebook. Just look for Catherine Hadro. Remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.